In the beginning, three simple words that have stirred countless hearts and inspired generations to wonder, where did we come from? Why are we here? What does it all mean? For many of us, the book of Genesis holds those answers. We've heard the story since childhood. God creating light, separating the sea from the sky, shaping the earth and its creatures, and finally forming mankind from the dust. But what if there's more to the creation story than we've ever been told? What if Genesis is not just a record of events, but a divine masterpiece with layers of wisdom, purpose, and mystery? What if behind each line, each word, there's a truth so profound it could transform how we view God, the world, and even ourselves? You see, many people read Genesis as a simple timeline of what happened, day one day, two, all the way to day seven. But the truth is, Genesis isn't a mere history lesson. It's a conversation, a divine whisper from eternity that speaks not just about what God did, but about who God is and what that means for you. It's not just about how the world began, it's about why it began. It's about intention, design, and a love so vast it shaped the stars and still reaches into your everyday life. Today, I want to invite you on a journey, a deep, reflective journey back to the beginning. Not to memorize facts or debate timelines, but to discover 7 powerful things you may not know about creation in Genesis. These aren't just theological trivia or ancient secrets. These are truths that matter because when you begin to see creation the way God intended it to be seen, you begin to see yourself the way He intended you to be seen, chosen, designed, loved. So whether you've studied Genesis for years or you're just hearing it with fresh ears, I encourage you to pause everything else, lean in, and let these truths wash over you. The story of creation is not finished. It echoes even now. And maybe it's calling your name, ready to begin again. Then let's step into the light right from the very beginning. Section 1. In the beginning was more than a moment. Let's go back to that very first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It's the sentence that launches all of Scripture, the words that open the doorway to everything we know. But what if those words are saying far more than we realize? In Hebrew, the original language of Genesis, that verse begins with the word Bereshit. At first glance, it translates simply to in the beginning. But if you sit with it a little longer, if you let the depth of the language breathe, you'll find something more. This word doesn't merely point to a moment in time. It carries with it a sense of primacy, of foundation, of purpose. It's not just the start of time, it's the start of meaning. Some ancient Jewish scholars saw something fascinating in the construction of that first word, Bereshit. They noticed contains within it the Hebrew word Rosh, meaning head or first, and Reshit, meaning beginning or chief. They believed this wasn't just a poetic opening. It was a theological claim that everything in creation was designed with wisdom, with intention, with a central figure in mind. It's not just that God created time. It's that He created it with someone or something as the focus. And who or what is at the center of that purpose. Later Scripture gives us a clue. In Colossians 1:16, Paul writes, "For by Him all things were created. All things were created through Him and for Him, who's the Him, Christ." So in a mystery that spans languages and centuries, Genesis 1:1 might be whispering something incredible, that everything was created in, through, and for Jesus. Think about that. From the first breath of the universe, everything had purpose. Nothing was random. Nothing was thrown together. You weren't an afterthought. Your life isn't a mistake. The same God who carefully constructed the galaxies also crafted your heart, and He did it on purpose. We often ask, why am I here? But Genesis flips the question around. Why wouldn't you be? If the whole universe began with purpose, then that means you began with purpose. From the very first sentence of the Bible, God is inviting you into something meaningful, something eternal, something rooted in love. So maybe today is the day you start seeing your life through the same lens God used when He created it. Not as a random sequence of events, but as a beautiful story that began in the heart of the Creator. Section 2. The Spirit hovered before anything made sense. Right after Genesis 1:1 comes a scene that's often overlooked, yet it may be one of the most comforting and mysterious moments in all of Scripture. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Genesis 1:1-2. Pause here. Before there was order, before there was light, before anything began to make sense, the Spirit of God was already there. Hovering, watching, waiting. The Hebrew word here for spirit is ruach, which means breath, wind, or spirit. It's the same word used later when God breathes life into man. It's the animating presence of God, the life force of all that is living. But here's what's truly remarkable. The Spirit hovered over chaos. The world at this point was described with two Hebrew words, tohu vavahu, formless and void. It was a state of confusion, disorder, and emptiness, and yet God was present, not distant, not waiting for it to clean itself up, not avoiding the mess. He hovered like a mother bird over her young, ready to bring life, ready to speak order into the confusion. Doesn't that sound familiar? Isn't that exactly how God shows up in our own lives? Sometimes we think God only comes when things are neat and tidy, when we've got the job lined up, the relationship healed, the sin cleaned up. But Genesis shows us the opposite. God moves in the chaos. He draws near when things are formless. He's not waiting for your life to be picture perfect. He's hovering right now, even in your confusion, your doubt, your anxiety. And that word hovering in Hebrew, it paints a picture of fluttering, trembling, almost like anticipation, like a parent leaning in, ready to catch a child's first steps. God's Spirit wasn't just there. He was expectant, waiting for the moment to speak light into darkness. Maybe that's you today. Maybe your life feels more tohu vavahu than ordered and blessed. Maybe you're looking around and thinking, God, where are you in all of this? Genesis gives you the answer. He's right here. Hovering, waiting, breathing, preparing to speak into your chaos with power and love. Sometimes we think the miracle begins when God speaks. But Genesis shows us something deeper. The miracle begins when God hovers. Before the healing, before the breakthrough, before the clarity, He's already there. And if He was there over the deep before the first sunrise, He's surely here now, hovering over your heart, ready to create something beautiful. Section 3. Light came before the sun. It's one of those details that's easy to miss unless you slow down. On the very first day of creation, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. But here's the thing. The sun, moon, and stars weren't created until day 4. Wait, so what exactly was that first light? This moment in Genesis has fascinated believers, theologians, and scientists for centuries because it suggests something profound. Light doesn't need a source when God is the one who commands it. Before the sun was hung in the sky, before the moon cast its first reflection, light existed because God said so. God. In Hebrew, the word used for light in this verse is, or pure light, radiance, illumination. It's not tied to any physical object. It's a light that stands on its own, and that tells us something beautiful. The very first thing God introduced into the world was clarity, direction, warmth, and hope. He didn't begin with building materials. He began with light. You might be thinking, how does that apply to me? Why does it matter? Because so often we're waiting for the sun to come up in our lives before we believe God is with us. We're waiting for a visible sign, a job offer, a diagnosis, reversed a relationship, mended, something tangible, something we can point to and say, there's my proof that God is working. But Genesis reminds us God's light often comes before the visible source. His presence often shows up before the solution is seen. And here's where it gets even more powerful. The New Testament picks up this very idea in a profound way. In John 1:4-5, it says of Jesus, "In Him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." The light that shone on day 1 wasn't just a glow in the sky. It was the essence of Christ, the eternal Word. The light of the world breaking into the darkness with life and truth. And when we reach the very end of Scripture, in Revelation 22:5, we're told that in the new heaven and earth, there will be no need for the sun or moon, because God Himself will be our light. So from Genesis to Revelation, light is not just a created thing, it's the signature of God's presence. His declaration that darkness will never have the final word. If you're in a dark season right now and it feels like there's no sun in sight, remember, light can come first. Hope can rise before your situation changes. You don't have to wait for the circumstances to shift before you start believing, because God's light shines in the dark and nothing can overcome it. Section 4. The days of creation may not be what you think. Let's talk about something that often causes debate, but also holds deep inspiration if we're willing to look closer. Genesis speaks of 6 days of creation and a seventh day of rest. And for many, that raises a question: were these literal 24-hour days or something else entirely? The Hebrew word used for day in Genesis is yom. And here's where it gets interesting. Yom can mean a 24-hour day. Yes, but it can also mean an undefined period, a season, a phase, even an era. In other words, the text itself leaves room for layers of interpretation. And it's not just a modern idea. Long before Darwin, before evolution theories or modern cosmology, early Christian thinkers like St. Augustine were already pondering this. Augustine wrote that the days of creation were likely symbolic, not because he doubted God's power, but because he believed God's wisdom surpassed our categories of time. So what's the takeaway? It's not about how fast God created, it's about how intentional he was. Whether each day was a literal sunrise to sunset cycle or a sweeping age in time, the pattern matters more than the pace. Let's take a step back and look at that pattern. Days 1 to 3, God forms the world. Days 4 to 6, God fills what he formed. Day 7, God rests not out of fatigue, but as a declaration, it is complete. It's a rhythm: forming, filling, resting. It's the rhythm of divine creativity. And you know what? That same rhythm shows up in our lives. Sometimes God is forming something in you quietly, slowly beneath the surface. It might feel like nothing is happening, but he's shaping the ground. Other times he begins to fill your life with new things, new opportunities, new relationships, new insights. And then in his grace, he calls you to rest. Not because you're done, but because he's reminding you that your worth isn't tied to constant activity. So don't be discouraged if your life feels like you're stuck in day 3, waiting for your sun to rise on day 4. God is not behind schedule. He doesn't rush. He doesn't panic. His timing is deliberate, sacred, and exact. And just like the world needed time to become what it was meant to be, so do you. Wherever you are in your process, whether you're in the forming, the filling, or the resting trust that your Creator is at work, the same God who orchestrated the cosmos knows exactly what he's doing with you. Section 5. God made rest a part of creation. It's the moment most of us rush past. After 6 full days of divine activity, separating light from darkness, forming oceans, crafting stars, animals, humans, God does something unexpected. He stops. Genesis 2:2 tells us, by the seventh day God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day he rested from all his work. And then something even more surprising happens. He blesses that day. Out of all the days in creation, the only one God calls holy is the seventh, the day he didn't create anything new. What does that tell us? It tells us that rest isn't a reward for hard work. It's not a luxury. It's not what you earn after burning out. Rest was part of the rhythm from the beginning. In fact, it was so important to God that he built it into the very structure of the universe. The Hebrew word used here is Shabbat, to cease, to stop, to pause. It's more than sleep. It's an intentional space where striving ends and presence begins. And right from the beginning, God showed us this is sacred. Think about it. Did God need to rest? Was he tired? Of course not. But he knew we would be. He knew we would live in a world that glorifies hustle and productivity, a world that measures your value by what you accomplish. And so before humanity even took their first breath, God declared, there will be time to stop and it will be holy. This flips everything, because it means your worth isn't in how much you get done. It means you were never created to live under constant pressure. It means your soul needs space, sacred space to breathe, to be still, to remember who you are and who God is. And here's the most beautiful part: when God rested, he invited us into that rest with him. It wasn't isolation, it was communion. The seventh day wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of relationship. That's what the Sabbath is: not just a nap, not a religious box to check, but an invitation back to Eden, to walk with God in the cool of the day, to put down our to-do lists and remember we are loved not because of what we do, but because of who we belong to. So if you feel exhausted, worn out, spiritually empty, maybe you don't need to push harder. Maybe what you need is what God modeled at the dawn of time: a pause, a rest that reminds you that you are not a machine. You are a creation, a beloved one. and your Creator is still saying, "Come rest with me." Section 6. The earth was a temple. Most of us have never looked at Genesis this way, but once you see it, it changes everything. The ancient world, especially in the Near East, had a very specific concept of how temples were built. First, a space would be formed, then it would be filled, and finally a deity would rest there, not to sleep but to rule from within it. That's what rest meant in a temple context. The god had entered the space to dwell in it, to reign from it. Now look again at Genesis 1 and 2. God forms the world, light and dark sky, and sea, land, and vegetation. Then he fills it with stars, birds, fish, animals, and finally humanity. And on the seventh day he rests. It's the same pattern. It's the language of a temple being built. And that tells us something stunning. The entire universe was created to be God's dwelling place. The world wasn't just designed to function, it was designed to be sacred space. Even the layout of Genesis echoes temple architecture: the deep, the sea, the skies above the garden in the center. It parallels the outer courts, inner courts, and holy place. And at the center of it all, humanity. Not as slaves, but as priests given the task to reflect God's image, care for creation, and live in His presence. This changes the way we see everything. It means your home, your daily work, your moments of quiet. They're not just ordinary life, they are part of God's temple. Your life is holy ground. Creation itself isn't just a backdrop, it's the sanctuary of the living God. And you are not a bystander, you're a participant. We often compartmentalize our faith church on Sunday, everything else the rest of the week. But Genesis doesn't allow for that. Genesis tells us everything is sacred. Every tree, every mountain, every heartbeat, every breath. Not because we declare it holy, but because God is here. And maybe that's the most powerful truth of all. God didn't wait for humanity to build a sanctuary to meet us. He made the whole world His temple and stepped into it from day one. So the next time you walk outside, take a deep breath. Listen to the wind in the trees. Watch the light shimmer on the water. You are standing in a temple far grander than any cathedral, and its architect still walks among us, just like he did in the garden, calling us to recognize the divine in the details. Section 7. Humanity was created last but not least. After 6 days of building, shaping, and speaking life into every corner of creation, God does something different, something more personal. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image and our likeness." Genesis 1:26. This is the first time God doesn't just speak something into existence. Instead, He announces it. He makes a statement, and for the first time there's a sense of conversation, of deliberation. Let us. It's as if the heavens held their breath. Something extraordinary was about to happen. Humanity wasn't created on day 1 or day 3 or day 5. We came last. And that wasn't an afterthought. It was a crescendo, the final brushstroke of a divine masterpiece. Everything else was made to prepare the world for us. The oceans, the mountains, the stars, they were stage and setting. But when God made us, it was different. He formed man from the dust of the ground, not with a distant word, but with His own hands. And then He did something He hadn't done with anything else. He breathed His own breath into us. Think about that. The same breath that formed galaxies was now filling human lungs. We weren't just animated, we were intimately connected to the divine. And more than that, we were made in His image. What does that mean? It means that when you speak, create, forgive, dream, love, you're reflecting your Creator. It means you carry something sacred. It means your life has value, not because of your talent, your background, or your achievements, but because the imprint of God is woven into your very being. And it also means that every person you meet, regardless of status, appearance, or belief, also carries that divine spark. When God looked at everything He had made, He said it was good. But when He made humanity, He looked again and said, "It is very good." You were not created to survive. You were created to reign with Him, to reflect Him, to walk with Him. In a world that tries to reduce people to numbers, to labels, to followers or prophets, Genesis stands tall and says, "No. You are image bearers of the Almighty. You were made for communion. You were made for glory." And the beauty of it all, that same breath He breathed into Adam is still breathing in you, right now in this moment. Conclusion. The beginning is still speaking. We've traveled back to the first pages of the Bible, but somehow it doesn't feel like ancient history anymore, does it? It feels present, alive, echoing. Because Genesis is not just a record of what God did, it's a revelation of who God is and who you are because of him. You've seen how every word in the beginning carries depth. That in the beginning isn't just about time, it's about purpose. That God's Spirit was hovering even before the first form took shape. That light came before the sun, proving that his presence doesn't rely on our circumstances. That the days weren't about speed, but about sacred rhythm. That rest wasn't an afterthought, it was built into the design. That the world isn't just a world, it's a temple, a dwelling place for God. And that you above all were created in his image by his hands with his breath. The story of creation is not about a distant God winding up the universe like a clock and walking away. It's about a God who is deeply, intimately involved, hovering, forming blessing, breathing. And here's the part we often miss: this story is still unfolding. Creation didn't stop on day 7. It continues every day in the new mercy that wakes you up, in the growth that happens in your waiting, in the light that breaks into your darkness. God is still creating, still redeeming, still calling you into relationship. So maybe it's time to look at your own life through Genesis eyes. Maybe you felt formless. Maybe you've been stuck in your own day, one wondering if anything will ever take shape. But remember, before light was visible, before the earth was habitable, before anything was beautiful, God was there. And he's still here in your chaos, in your becoming, in your breath. This is not the end. This is still the beginning. So don't be afraid to start again. Don't be afraid to trust that even now, God is hovering over your waters, whispering, "Let there be light." And when you hear him say it, step into it, because the creator of the universe is not finished with you yet. He's just getting started.